The Miami game is going to be the most telling game for the Florida Gators in 2024.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day, we are available daily and free reviews of the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Wednesday. I'm Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. I apologize. I know that usually I don't sound great. I know that I sound way worse right now. If it helps, I feel like death. So there's that. But for me, the Florida Gators and Miami game is going to be the most telling for the Florida Gators. And by that, I just mean as far as what this team is, that's going to be it, right? I mean, let's call it what it is. First game of the season, your first opportunity to show what you are and show what you can do. Makes sense that that's the most telling, right? However, for me, it's also partially about you look at last season against Utah, and the Florida Gators just didn't come to play in week one. One of the most frustrating performances I've ever seen. I think that post-game live show is still our most watched episode ever of Locked On Gators, just because, you know, it was horrible. It was horrible. A bunch of the staff unfollowed me after that game because of how in on them I went. I stand on it. I just want to make that one very clear. But last year, this team stunk it up in week one. Can't let that happen again. Can't show up again and not play well in week one. The start of the year, you can't stink again. It's just that can't happen, right? Also, I want to say this. I know that both sides will disagree with me here. I don't think Florida Gators fans will agree with me. I don't think Miami fans will agree with me here. But I think these two teams are fairly even talent-wise. I don't care about Florida having a 4.5 projected win total. I don't even know what Miami's is. Probably like 8.5. I don't care about Florida playing the SEC, Miami playing in the ACC. I don't care about what your recruiting class ranking was. I don't care about what your coach's record has been throughout the duration of his career. None of that. From a pure ball perspective, I think these teams are pretty even. I don't think either team has a significant quarterback advantage. I don't think either team has a significant offensive tackle advantage. I do think that Miami has a more promising outlook on offensive tackle. But as far as proven production there, I've said before, like I don't think Francis Mauigoa was great last year. I think he was for a freshman, but you know, you're not playing on a freshman team. You're playing against seniors and super seniors, and some guys on Miami's team have been there for 9 years. So yeah, you're playing against everybody. It's not just good for a freshman. I do think he was very good for a freshman, but good in general, I don't think he was. But that's not a knock on him. He was a freshman. Makes sense. I think Miami's got the edge at pass rusher. Outside corner, sure. Receiver, I think it's Florida. But I think that, you know, you're close enough in a lot of areas. Like, and those were just the premium positions. Like Florida's got better tight ends, better running back room in general. Obviously banged up right now. But I just think when you look at these teams, I really don't think they're that far apart. I don't even know if I'd be able to tell you which team I think is better. I don't. I think right now that they're both pretty even. And so for me, I think this is an even opponent that you're facing in week one. It's an interesting opportunity to prove who you are and show your fan base who you are for both sides. Also, last year, Miami, incredibly young team. Florida, incredibly young team, right? Both sides of the ball, too. It's not just like they were, oh, yeah, we were really young on offense or really young on defense. Both teams, pretty young on both sides of the ball. And so for me, again, this is where we throw the recruiting ranking out the window, throw the individual rankings and the team rankings out the window. Young teams, again, both teams, both young on both sides of the ball. I think this is a good opportunity to go, well, who develops better? Which coaching staff is going to develop their players better? Like, I think that's vitally important in terms of, again, I'm not just saying, this is the most important game, whatever it may be. I'm saying as far as who are the Florida Gators, that Miami game is going to be crucial because we'll find out who's developed long term, who's been there, because both coaches are in year 3. You kind of lose some of the excuses you had last year. And not even kind of, you straight up lose some of the excuses you had last year. So when I look at how telling this game is, I do think it's important to compare the two because, again, if Miami's developed their players better than Florida, that's a bad sign for Florida, right? Like they're going to tell you straight up who we are as a team. And I think that the Florida Gators will do that. In week 1, I think you'll get a very good picture of who this team is. And again, I mean, you could talk about how things will change and all that stuff, but like throughout the season, they'll develop, they'll gain chemistry, whatever, maybe, sure. But just from a bare bones perspective, this first game is going to tell you who these teams are, who both these teams are. Again, I'm talking mostly about Florida, but it'll tell you who both these teams are. Are you a team that, I mean, you're 1-1 in your opener for Florida. You're undefeated as your home opener, which this game is at home, which is very relevant. But 1-1 in your season opener under Billy Napier, with that first game being electric. I mean, just unmatched energy. And then your second home opener being dead in the water. Just no other way to put it, just dead in the water. And so you look at that, you go, okay, well, not great, right? Now you gotta show what you can be in week 1, especially because last year week 1, like your most recent week 1 was horrible. So now you got to prove that. You're going up against another really young team. Have they developed better than you? Because then that's another indictment of who you are as a team, who you are as players, as coaches, as a roster. It tells you everything. And so for me, that's why I think Miami, and I don't even think it's close. I think Miami is the first game where they tell you who they are. And I think Miami will be the most telling game to say, this is who we are as a program, as a team, as a roster. Whether that's good or bad, I think that the Miami game is that. There's 2 more very important games, I think at least, to tell you who they are as a team. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Gators. GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and buying. I told you, I've gone to concerts. I went to see that Mexican OT a couple weeks ago. I went to see Anita in early June. I went to see Shibuzi 4th of July weekend. Bought all the tickets on GameTime. I'm going to be front row Miami at Florida. Bought those on GameTime. I literally put my money, not literally where my mouth is, but I put my money where my mouth is. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or any tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code Locked On College for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thanks for being Locked On Gators, your first listen of the day. Every day, we are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. And I think the next most telling game for the Florida Gators will be Tennessee, which 6 weeks after you start the season. But for me, your first road game, Mississippi State. Okay? I don't think that that's the game that'll tell you who the Florida Gators are, because I do think that Florida is a considerably better team than Mississippi State. And so I think that if you lose that game, then we probably already know who you are, and it's probably not good. And if you win that game, okay, maybe you answer the question about not being able to show up on the road at all, but really, I don't think so. However, Tennessee, yeah, that's Neyland is a tough road environment. I don't care what naming rights they give or anything. It's going to be Neyland for me. Tough road environment. Like you look at 2022, which by the way, maybe Florida's best road showing under Billy Napier. I understand that last year you won a road game against South Carolina, but I don't know. I feel like that road game against Tennessee is probably the road game where you go, all right, like they had it. They were right there. Came down to literally a Hail Mary, which we've seen Florida convert against Tennessee specifically before. So I think Tennessee, tough road environment. Think that this year they've got a lot of hype around them. We'll see what's still going on in the middle of the season when they play. But for Florida, you're 2-10 away from home under Billy Napier. 1-5 in each year. Specifically 1-5 in each year, which is not great. Obviously, you had 2 losses versus Georgia, neutral site games. So 2-8 on the road. Still not good. And you have the bowl loss at a neutral site against Oregon State. 2-7 on the road. Sorry, since that's the neutral site. So 2-7 on the road throughout your career. Still not great, right? You can keep chalking up losses and taking them away all you want. It's not going to look good regardless, okay? So then you look at that road game in 2022 for Florida at Neyland. You were there. You had a few defensive screw-ups. You had, again, AR with the Hail Mary. Didn't work out at all. But for Florida, this is your first chance to show what you can do on the road. You got Texas later on, but that's not an even team at all. Texas is a better football team than you. I understand that there's going to be some Florida Gators fans that disagree and go, oh, they lost their running back, and oh, Florida's got another year to go. I understand that. That doesn't mean much to me. Again, my opinion is my opinion. I think Texas is a better football team than Florida. I think you're going on the road. It's going to be a really tough game to win on the road. Texas is a really tough environment. Yeah, going to be rough there. But I think that the Tennessee game, I think Tennessee is probably I want to say slightly better team than Florida. But I don't think it's a large enough difference to go, oh, yeah, Tennessee should blow them out, even if it's in Neyland. I don't think Florida should get blown out at any point. And that tough road environment matters to again, show you what the kind of team this is, to show you just how real this team is, to show you just the grit this team has. Whether or not, again, you show up and play great or get blown out of the water. This will be a game that tells you what that team is. And if you show up and you play really well against Tennessee and you win that game on the road, maybe we can have a conversation about the Texas game. Maybe. But if you show up and show the Florida Gators fan base, you show us what you've done so far on the road, and you show up and do that against Tennessee, a lot of Florida Gators fans are probably just going to skip out on that Texas game because it's going to be ugly. I also think it's important to talk about how Week 7, 6th game, kind of the point last year where this program peaked, right? You blew Vandy out. It was like 38-14 or 40-14 or something like that. Blew Vandy out. Then things came crashing down. You won one game after that news. The next week at South Carolina, which was a game where you had a few lucky breaks. You fought like hell. You did everything you could. You played a great game. But you had a couple lucky breaks there. Specifically, the ball that hit Ricky Pearsall and Trey Wilson dove and caught. That's a lucky break. Like, it's a great play by Trey, but like you got a lucky break there. Both can be true. You only won one game after that, including a loss to 2-7 Arkansas at the time. 2-7 Arkansas in Gainesville. Things came crashing down. You lost, I think, 42-20 to Georgia. lost a close game to Missouri, lost a hideous game to Florida State. LSU ran away with it, but also, I don't know, like the LSU game just felt like LSU was going to win just because neither team could stop anybody, and LSU's offense was more explosive. But yeah, from that midpoint last year, that's where things came crashing down. And so for Florida, this is going to be a telling game of what you're going to look like, and will hopefully be an indicator of what you look like for the remainder of the season, which there's one more game in that last leg. That final 5-game stretch where the Florida Gators run the gauntlet again, I guess. There's one game there that I do think is very telling for who this team is. Again, and at this point, it'll be late in the season. We'd have seen a ton, but to know truly what this team is. And I don't mean record-wise. I don't mean schedule-wise. I mean who this team is down to their bone, down to their core. One more game left. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Gators. The last game that we are going to talk about, which, by the way, thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day, every day. We are available daily and free, wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. We've got our Dynasty series going with Whole Nine Sports. And we've got franchise as well for Madden just coming out. To wrap up today's show, one more team to talk about, one more game to talk about. It's Ole Miss. And I understand why people would go, oh, like you're severely outmatched in this talent-wise. I don't think you're wrong there. This is your last home game of the season. And again, I think Ole Miss is a really good football team. They went into the portal. They added a ton of defensive players. You got Pete Golding in year 2 as your DC, who, by the way, Pete Golding, Ron Roberts' coaching tree, dating back to Delta State in like 2011. So Pete Golding's there. He's also been under Nick Saban. But for me, the Ole Miss game, I feel like it has to be a game where you really figure out who you are for a few reasons, right? First off, it's your last home game of the season against a team that should be in the college football playoff. And if they're not in the college football playoff, that is just a gross underperformance by them. So that's your last one there. Yeah, and again, your last home game of the season. However, there's two people specifically that I think we need to talk about with Ole Miss. First off, Lane Kiffin, right? Lane Kiffin is a coach I do not like. I've said that before. I don't like him as a head coach. I think he's a tremendous schemer. I think he's young Dan Mullen with better, I don't even want to say better management of NIL, but knows how to get more NIL. Obviously, Dan Mullen wasn't really around in the NIL era, but we know what recruiting's been like. Lane Kiffin just publicly calls out his boosters and everything. Stuff like that works, right? Think he's entertaining. Good play caller. I think he's young Mullen. And he's also the guy that whenever there are Billy Napier's on the hot seat, Billy Napier is going to get fired. Which, by the way, that Texas or that Tennessee like meme reporter yesterday had me cracking up with his Billy Napier's been informed he's going to be fired. It's just a matter of when is so funny to me because like imagine that. Imagine the conversation of, because again, it's not true, but imagine the conversation of, hey, you're going to get fired this year. It's just a matter of when that's going to happen. It's funny because like once you say that, it's like, oh, well, we win 10 games, getting fired this year. It's just a matter of when. But Lane Kiffin is the guy that whenever people go, hey, what happens if Billy Napier gets fired? Lane Kiffin is always one of the first names that you hear from Florida Gators fans. Lane Kiffin, Jed Fish, Dan Lanning, they're all early names that you hear every single time. Those three come up every time. For Billy, assuming you're still employed at this point, that's got to be a meaningful game for you, right? Like if you're Billy Napier and you get to go head-to-head against Lane Kiffin, that's got to be meaningful for you. Like you've got to be on your A game going, yeah, the guy that everybody wants the program to replace me with, I went out there and beat him. I think that the Ole Miss game is really telling for Billy Napier as a coach, more so than it is for the roster. I do. I think that Ole Miss game, you got to come out swinging. I think that Ole Miss game, you've got to come out and you have to outscore Ole Miss. I don't mean that you've got to win 10-7. I mean, there's probably going to be a lot of points scored in that game, regardless of how good both teams are defensively. You've got to go out there and you've got to outscore Lane Kiffin. I don't care if they score 7 and your defense plays the best game they've ever played. You've still got to score 35. Because this is about Lane Kiffin, the guy who, in 2023, when you had a really low-scoring spring game, Lane Kiffin tweeted out the little, I don't even know what they're called, the pond-hopping planes, whatever they're called, the really tiny planes. He tweeted out that was your offense. Right? He took Austin Simmons from you, and then he tweeted out the Tom Petty playlist. Like, this is one of those times where we find out if Billy Napier's really about it. Because I know that there's a lot of times where people go, oh, yeah, like, Billy Napier's too reserved. He's too whatever. He's too nice to people. This is the game where I need Billy Napier to go, you know what? We're going to score a lot, and then up yours right there. Like, that's what I need. And then roster-wise, you're going up against Princely. Princely left Florida to go to Ole Miss, like, to stay in the SEC. He had the choice to go to the NFL. He would have been a second-round pick. That's not a conversation. That's not a discussion. He would have been a second-round pick. I'm telling you that factually. He would have been a second-round pick. Chose to go to the SEC, Ole Miss, stay in the SEC, go to Ole Miss, play Pete Golding's defense so that he could try to become a first-round pick instead of dropping into coverage 75% of the time. You got to beat him. I want you to run right at him, and I want you to pummel him. I do. You left to go stay in the SEC. You had the choice to go to the NFL. And you said, no, I'm not ready for the NFL, but I'm not staying here either. Pummel him. Run right at him. Do it. Put him in the ground. I hope Hayden gets a nice pancake there. But you got to do it. As a team, I feel like you have to go, that pisses me off. That you didn't want to do this with us. You didn't want to build this with us. That pisses me off. And I need you to pummel him. Simple as that. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free reviews in the podcast and on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Talk more Florida Gators football for Locked On Gators. I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my great work with Giants Country and NFL 33, and I'll see you all next time.